Welcome back to another YouTube episode on the Coleman and Co PR YouTube channel. I have a special guest with me today. Normally you get to just listen to me ramble about motorsport marketing and all of the reasons I think it's such a great idea. But what I thought I would do instead is ask one of our clients, our media clients, Matt Nolte, on with me today to talk about the value of brands investing in race teams and also in obviously race car drivers as well. So thank you for taking the time, Matt.
Pleasure, Megan. It might be your first one on your YouTube channel. That's what I want to know.
Yeah, you are. You're the first guest on my YouTube channel.
Yes. Excellent. Yeah, cool. I'm glad I'm number one. Always good to chat to you.
So I wanted to talk to you about this conversation purely because you and I have had many chats since we've known each other, particularly about this subject. And if you don't know who Matt Nolte is, you're probably not super around motorsport. So this will give you a bit of an idea as to the kind of genius brain that I'm picking into today. And I don't say this to stroke his ego. I'm super conscious of not doing that, but unfortunately this is just facts. So here we go. So you commentate the Super Utes, the Aussie racing cars, TCM or Touring Car Masters, Trans Am, TA2, sprint cars, and drag racing, amongst a bunch of other ones, but they're probably the most relevant ones. We love all categories. In my opinion, I think you're the best place to have this conversation with, because you have to say things like, you know, City Rural Insurance, Aussie Racing Car, Cody Mackay, and the Carlton Zero, Duke Barguana, Baby Commodore, all of these names.
So you can do my job as well.
See, I could do your job. No, I think we've proven that I'm definitely not the best person to do your job. If you've ever sat in a commentary box, and as somebody who, like, I like to pride myself on how many things I can do at once and how many things I can multitask you do. I could not actually listen to what was being said in my earphones by the producers and then listen to what you were saying. In the meantime, you've like cut to an ad break and you've done all it, and I'm just like, I was so overwhelmed with what was going on in my earholes. And I was like, so I think I'll just stick to my skill set. So
it's a different world, isn't it, once you go behind the scenes?
It's ridiculous. It's insane, but it's very exciting. So what I wanted to chat to you today about in particular, because I feel like if you are not a motorsport fan in particular, or you've never experimented with motorsport marketing or kind of aligning yourself with a race team or driver, I really want to give people some information as to, you know, the types of ways you can get into this and the benefits that you can really see. So I think that it's safe to sponsors kind of keep this whole thing going.
Yeah, absolutely.
Support from the brands we know and love, we wouldn't have a sport to even talk about today. So that's why this is super important, that we can showcase the return on people's investments, so it's not just like, oh hey, here's $5,000 to sponsor me this racetrack and we're going to give you nothing back. I actually really want to, now that I've been able to, I guess, take a look behind the scenes, kind of share what actually goes into making this successful for businesses. So I want to start with what should be a super simple one for you. So here we go. So I would love to know. So like, I know that we've had these chats a million times, so I already have a pretty fair idea, but then you come out with just random stuff that I'm like, okay, cool. Like, yeah, that's a very good point as well. So I'm sure you're going to bring some stuff up today. But I would love to know from your perspective, why do you think that motorsport delivers such a strong brand recall in comparison to other sports?
I think over the years, traditionally, motor racing has had loyal fans. And this goes back to maybe the 80s when, sadly, they're not around now, when Holden and Ford had their big rivalry going on then. That then brought in automotive brands that got involved, petrol, oil, tyres, for example. So if you saw, say, for example, a Bridgestone tyre on a car run a race on the weekend, you'd more often go out and support Bridgestone. Or for me as a kid, been watching the Touring Car Championship was sponsored by Shell. So religiously since I was a teenager, it's been Shell. So that has a big impact on the fans, and the fans are drawn to that. It was always pushed into the audience, and if you support the brands, they'll keep supporting motorsport, and I think that's still true today.
Yeah, I agree. And it's funny that as you said that, because I mean, obviously I have a particular race manufacturer that I support over others in the supercars, but it is, if you look at it, even different petrol stations, it's like, oh, this isn't my brand, or this isn't my race team service station.
Yeah, it feels weird, doesn't it? You go into a different store and you go, oh, I don't feel I belong in here. And I think that's been a uniqueness of over the years, that, you know, motorsport fans would go, I wouldn't be caught dead in a Ford store, or I wouldn't be caught dead in a Holden shop, or, you know, it's amazing how that's done over the years. And with today, you can attract sponsorship, but share it on so many levels. It's gone from going into a store, for example, to supporting them online.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's one of the things that I really like to harp on, because it's one thing to say to brands something like, we'll get your business on TV and on broadcast and all of these things, which is absolutely so true. However, it's the value outside of that we are able to support brands coming on board with. So obviously, and especially nowadays, well, I feel like every race round we talk about how it's like a record number of crowds, and there are more people coming back to it. And I don't know, you may have an opinion on this, but whether that's like post-COVID and people are kind of just coming back out, or whether it's the investment that the category or the sport as a whole are putting into entertainment. So it's not just, regardless of whether you're a race fan or whether your boyfriend's dragging you along or a group of friends are going, so you say, I may as well go along as well. Like, there's something there for everybody. So, there's obviously meet and greets with the fans. And I recorded something earlier about, which again, that just prompted my mind, but it was, you could have your brand on a race car or a driver's, race suit, for example, and you can have tens of thousands of people taking photos with that driver or next to that car. And then before you know it, you can have some random pop up on your Instagram and there's your business name.
Yeah.
We've got this huge opportunity to broadcast and amplify these brands from that perspective as well. So yeah, I guess I'd love to know from the entertainment perspective on your side, like, why do you think that there's more fans coming back to actually coming through the gates?
I think it's a mixture of everything you just said then. I think 2020 taught us a lot of lessons about how simple and how easy all your, so not your rights, but your luxuries can be taken away, and what your freedoms, I guess, were taken away. Then I think people woke up after all that going, you know what, I am going to go and see this game or this race this weekend, or I'm going to go off to this holiday that I was putting off for years and years and years. So I think that's actually helped the world in general, not just motor racing. I think for me now, what I've noticed over the last 20 years of being in commentary and probably 30 years being in the sport, is the female demographic is huge now in the sport. So that's opening up more avenues now for sponsorship. Like, female-based sponsorship wasn't around much back in the day, especially in the 90s, early 2000s. And now you've got female mechanics, females in race control, in broadcast, which is cool. So that opens up another avenue for potential sponsors to be involved.
Okay, so I didn't even have this question written down, but you've segued it perfectly for me. So something
Good.
I touched on previously. Yes, thank you for prompting me.
Yeah. Throw that script in the bin now.
I will. I think for the amount of conversations that I have with you and the amount of things that we've spoken about, and then putting like a camera in my face for somebody who's not afraid of talking in front of a camera, it just feels really bizarre to be on this other side of the screen asking your opinion on stuff. Anyway, it's good fun. So I think the broad scape of demographics. So, and I think you get into motorsport for different reasons. Like myself, for example, like my dad was a huge motorsport fan. And so I used to, I was the kid that got put up, and regardless of whether I was awake or not, on the lounge on a Sunday morning of Bathurst, and I wasn't awake, and we had, a whole tribe of people around to watch the race all day. And it just became like just something that you did. So
tradition.
and that's exactly right. And then then you get so emotionally invested in your teams and in your drivers in particular as well. And to talk about the Ford Holden rivalry, I think it's like when drivers go from different teams, from like if a notorious Ford driver went across to Holden or vice versa, it was like this massive big uproar. It was like you're almost like, what do you mean? Like, I can't go for a Holden now. So people are that emotionally invested in the manufacturers and in the drivers as well. And I think we'll use Craig Lowndes, for example. I think, if you take, and he's done obviously Ford and Holden on both sides, and he actually was able to like bridge that gap, I feel, for supporters who were like, you know what, I hate Holden, but he's gone back to Holden, so I'll support him. Or like probably it's more the other way around, like, Holden man comes across to Ford for a few seasons, and then all of us at Ford were like, yes, we love that.
Yeah.
It really speaks to the personal brand power of the drivers themselves.
If you weren't around to see how big of impact that was when Lowndes went to Ford in 2001, that was the biggest story still, even to this day, in Aussie motor racing. That was like, he's going to do what? No one saw it coming. Everyone thought he'll stay at HRT. He might drive a Holden somewhere else, but everyone thought he's HRT bound. That's it, no more. And to pull that off back in 2001, that was enormous for motor racing. But you know what? It also, I think, broke down the manufacturer support, and watching from that point onwards, there was like drivers swapping camps. I mean, no one really said a word about Stephen Richards jumping into a Ford because it was so overshadowed by Lowndes going there. But as time went on, you were starting to see more and more fans going for drivers and not more the manufacturer, which is what you see in Formula One now. You don't see someone supporting Ferrari solely or solely supporting McLaren. They'll go for a driver. So that's been the shift in the dynamic, I guess, over the years from a fan point of view. That's like, well, you wouldn't be caught dead wearing a Ford shirt, but hang on, Craig Lowndes is driving a Ford now, so I've got to go for him because I went for him all those years. So that was a real masterstroke back then and built such a great rivalry.
Yeah, for sure. And I think we'll continue to see that more as, like, they just announced Toyota, and you revealed their new car and everything. And I think when it went from like Ford v Holden to, Chev and Mustang, and then, chuck all the other, I guess, manufacturers that have been in there over the last couple of years. But going back to my point, I completely sidestepped there. My point of having a
that wouldn't be us, would it?
No, I know. This is going to be like 3 hours long by the end of it. I'm going to have to do like a 7-parter just so that it's tolerable to sit through. But for brands, it's not just the dudes that watch motorsport anymore. So you are able to use some marketing budget in investing into a motorsport partnership. And it's not like you're just getting, the guys who were, sitting in a shed with maybe a project car on one side and, a beer in the other hand. It's us. And, and I guess we see it a lot, with people, even just around the grounds. And I'm super mindful of this purely, I think it's just because the lens I look it through, but I see, just as many females as well out there supporting their favorite drivers. That drive to survive has shown us that, again, once you showcase the personality of like the person behind the helmet, and it's harder for drivers because unlike, to use AFL, I suppose, as a reference point, you can see the passion and you can see the grit and you can see them go, like head to head and whatever. You can actually see their faces and you get the emotion. You don't get like that when you're looking at, someone under a visor inside like a shell, of a car. So it's really from an external perspective, especially on broadcast, that is where the partnership, like if you could invest in a sticker on a car, could actually be so impactful because you are watching your favorite driver, but you're watching their car ultimately, like when you're actually looking at it on screen.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Formula One doing what they did back in 2020, and I think it was one of those perfect storm moments, doing a Drive to Survive Netflix series and then the whole world shut down. So everyone was really, it was 100% audience engagement, whereas if it happened 3 or 4 years beforehand, it might have got lost in the dark because purely there wasn't the eyeballs around. You raised a really good point a while ago, not in this conversation, but earlier in the year, about seeing stuff from a different angle. We get caught up probably in our own little world, what we do. And no, don't be wrong. I think I've got the coolest job in the world, and I'll say that probably for the rest of my life. But you raised a really good point about we don't see enough behind the scenes stuff. And I really never took that seriously because it was like, well, in the day, they're watching the cars. They're not watching what goes on behind the scenes. And it's been amazing to see what other sports have done, whether it's your radio networks now having vision match up with the commentary just to show what goes on behind the scenes. Because sometimes I'll watch a race back and you'll never know what was going on in that commentary box, like how we get into it. You just hear what we say. And footy commentators are some of the best for it because usually there's 5 or 6 people in there at once, all trying to get their point across. But they're genuine fans of their chosen sport. But I didn't realise how much of an impact that made to the fans and how much the fans love that and how much they want that still.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it blew my mind. I know we were having this conversation even just the other day about how we, as just a general spectator, don't appreciate the level of prep that goes into how, you remember, and you're like honestly the worst for it. And that's why we created a whole Nolte's knowledge section, because it's just like the recall in your head. It's unreal. And this is why brands have the ability to be so synonymous with even just a race team. I mean, if I think of like Red Bull Ampol Racing, it's probably like the only example that's coming to mind right now. And now I'm put under pressure. Now I'm panicking. No, I'm joking. And so they've been different versions of Red Bull over the the last couple of years with different partners that they've aligned themselves, and same with Shell V-Power, like when Penske were involved and things like that. So it's regardless of whether you're kind of aligning yourself as the major sponsor, I still really believe, and I've seen it, I guess, specifically with working with the drivers that we do, that you can come on as a round sponsor and you can sponsor a driver that is maybe early in their career that isn't potentially getting top tens, and vice versa. Somebody who is a seasoned legend that has been around, absolutely loves, investing the time and energy and money into attending every single race round, that they likely know that, maybe 15th is the highest position they're going to, get for each race round weekend. What I don't think is portrayable enough is the value that brands can get with aligning themselves with drivers like that, because you guys are so good at telling narratives, like explaining narratives and bringing, like we were talking about before, when there's a safety car going around and there's nothing excitingly impactful happening that you need to let people know about on their screens, it's those kind of narratives and those kind of stories that are told beautifully then, because then it's like, okay, cool, like we've got a little bit of a minute to breathe now. Let's actually bring the fans along for a little bit of, like, a bit of a story about a race driver, and that one story can stick in your mind because you can relate to somebody like that. And then brands are able to obviously sponsor drivers that aren't, you're not looking at slapping your logo on a Red Bull car, for example, because that might be a little bit of a higher investment. But coming in this amateur level, I would love to know still the impact that you see with being basically the voice of supercar support categories.
I think it's better now than it's ever been for potential sponsors to get involved, because up until 2015, support categories didn't get live TV. Very rarely did they get a race shown on the weekend. Usually it was post-produced and played a week later on a Saturday afternoon when everybody else is out with friends and family, and it doesn't really get seen. Now it's live and it's right there in front of you, whether it's a Friday afternoon at 4 o'clock or it's Saturday morning at 8:30. You can't hide from that. I think it's done a great thing for support categories to attract more sponsorship. It's a tough market, and you know yourself what it's like out there now. It's harder to get it than what it's ever been. But a team just wanting someone to throw money at their car and put a sticker on there, you just can't do that now. Sponsors want more from teams and drivers. They just don't want to say, well, here's some disposable income that we have in our business, and then send me a picture of your car and we'll hang it up on the wall in December at the end of the season. They want the full experience now. So while it's tough, the tools at their disposal have never been better to say, hey, we've got live TV this weekend on Fox, KO. Hey, we're lucky enough this weekend at Channel 7 are going to show one of our races. Even if it's just one, it's still better than what it was 10 to 12, 15 years ago. So it's pushing that harder now, that while, it may be a lower level category to get involved in, you'll get noticed on there, and all of a sudden, you attract teams further up pit lane. And we've seen sponsors come in over the years that put their toe in the water with a Ute or a Porsche, for example, and all of a sudden they're on a supercar team down the lane. So it's the teams, the drivers working together with potential sponsors, and not just going, well, this is what we do. Here's a A4 document of what my achievements are. Give me the money. It just doesn't work that way anymore. But you've never had the tools to use now to go to a sponsor, and social media has also been a huge benefit for that. I mean, you can see a race live, but then all of a sudden it's clipped up into reels or into shorts or anything like that. So it's not just, there's the race, it's put in the can, you'll never see it again. It's everywhere.
Yeah, and I think it's got more longevity than, I've got a lot of opinions in general, but specifically around how we can...
Really? I thought you were reserved.
I am. I'm actually such a shy person.
Oh, really?
Yeah, you never really hear me speak speak how I'm feeling. Could you imagine? Boring. I think
we've been hiding this person.
Yeah, she's the one that you just don't hear because it's the one that overshadows everything. It's part of my charm. Well, you have to, if I want to get my sponsors and my boys knowing, this is just, just stand at the top and shout the loudest. But I think that we're able to reuse it in so many different ways, where it's not just on race weekend that all of your social media, and I just don't like seeing it, and I see this in categories too, is like, all right, we're going to give a big hit, like here it all is, here's all of the information we need, that big sugar spike of likes and views and comments and engagement and all that other stuff, and then it's going to go to shit in between rounds. And then if you're in a support category, like some of our category, like youth, for example, we got like 6 rounds a year like that, and that's over however many supercars rounds there are compared to, do you know the number?
Yeah,
Does that
or
make sense?
they roughly run half the year. So, but
Yeah,
there's big,
literally. So
yeah,
how can you actually get creative and support again the businesses that are coming on board? Because I guarantee you, if you can, obviously, like posting products an easy one, and it's not just like posting shots of your race car and look how fast I'm going. There are so many other stories that you can tell, and so many other ways that you can leverage your brand's support, I suppose, in kind of investing there. And you, like you say, disposable income. And I think that we can all agree that times are tougher than they've ever been. And disposable income is potentially not a luxury that all businesses have. So
right.
that's why I'm really all about squeezing as much value for our brand partners that come on board with our drivers in particular, because otherwise it's like, yeah, here's $5,000, right? And what I can return very confidently for our brand partners, $5,000, for example, on one of our
Yeah.
race cars, is we can give you TV exposure. Okay, that's obviously a no-brainer. However, we work very smart about how we do that. As you said before, social media is one of the most underutilized things still, I think, for drivers, because again, I can post, like, and I'll use Cody as an example. He won't mind me highlighting him. But the way that we utilize his fan base as well, and the way that we continually update everybody. So every single, like after every session, so whether it's practice, quali, a race, or whatever, I'm there with the microphone in my hand, and I expect him, regardless of how it's gone. If he's, we've had the last couple of he's had a DNF, and the last thing he wants to do is talk to me about it. But if I have gone to a brand and said, hey, invest in this guy, he will give you sponsors, he will give you the shout out, and he will, be a brand partner for you to utilize. And it's the high engaged and high intensity and just high excitement brand partner like him shouting your business that our brand partners actually see such value out of as well. So it's not, again, just that outside. And then further to that as well, if I actually want to talk about PR, because apparently that's what we do here, is if you then start talking about podcasts and blog articles and radio and potentially even TV, like that's just another layer on top outside of race weekend, that it's not just, again, that look, here we're coming into race weekend, let's talk about it, okay, we're done. And then
Yeah.
because I mean the youth gap from when were we in Townsville, whenever that was,
July.
until the next race isn't in. Thank you. I knew you'd feel that gap for me.
That's a really good point, though, because you have these big gaps, and this is where I think you've come in with a breath of fresh air into the sport, that you can be creative in those times in between the rounds. Because traditionally, the Utes, as far back as I can remember, they started in 2018. We'd started Adelaide before it became the grand final. Then it was 2 or 3 months before we'd race again. You go, how do you attract one and service a sponsor in that time? And then all of a sudden you get that late season rush where we do 4 rounds in 3 months. So, you've kind of got to think about, okay, well, it's only 7 rounds, 6 rounds or 7 rounds a year. That's only less than 2 months a year that you've got, out of a sponsor. What are they going to get out of that as a return? So to try and make that spin those plates all year long, that's hard to do now.
Yeah. We've got more tools than ever, though, which is exciting. And
yeah, it's that's the key.
Yeah. And it's not a high cost thing either. It's like a little bit of creativity and app like CapCut or go nuts on TikTok, really, which I know you love doing. We're still trying to convince Knowles to get a TikTok account.
Well, how would you be if you found out I've had one the whole?
I would be so angry at you. Because that's probably something that would be helpful to do my job. But anyway, What do I
know? No, and it's these days, like, you've got to I think having the growth of a social media manager or a PR manager was only usually for the big teams back in the day. Like your factory teams would have it. You wouldn't, especially when I worked, starting to sound like an old dinosaur now, but when I was involved in a couple of teams back in the 90s, it was like we didn't do PR because we too busy trying to get a car on the track, and we're usually to the bottom of the top 30. So it was like, well, we had a band of people that came together. Most of them were sponsors anyway that were given a role on the team back in that day, and that was the PR. So they'd obviously their business would be on the car, and they'd sell the car when they were back at their work to other places. But now you've got to have a dedicated PR manager and sometimes a PR team. Some of these teams have not just got one person, there's several people doing that now. So it's been a big shift, but I'd say to any sponsor, like, motor racing is still a very attractive prospect. whether it's supercars or it's, national level racing or it's club level, or even club level racing now has live streaming at their events. That alone there is a perfect way to get a sponsor in. It may be like, oh, I don't know about this, never seen it before. Look, I'll come out to Sandown this weekend and have a look, and realise that the paddocks had never been full with cars. The demographic shift between male and female is probably working itself up to a good level now compared to it just being a full male-dominated sport. And that's the thing, is motorsports had to try and shape for years. And it's not about, bogans. It's not about being male-dominated. We're all pissed on the hill at Bathurst. It isn't like that anymore. They took a long time to shake that off, but I think that's still got that demeanour about it. It's probably going to take a long time to get rid of. It's a lot more family-friendly than it's ever been. But going for different sponsors that not necessarily are involved in car racing or involved in the automotive industry, I think it's a great time and a great option for them to get involved. People always laugh, like when Castrol went off and sponsored rugby union or rugby league, and everyone goes, well, why? And it's like, because purely it was on numbers. They did their numbers and went, this is where we're going to get our best return in the sport. Or when NASCAR started attracting dishwashing detergents as sponsors, then it wasn't AC Delco, it wasn't Pontiac, it wasn't Chev, it wasn't Goodyear. It was these everyday household items. They just look at the numbers and go, okay, the numbers stack up, we'll get involved.
Yeah. And I think that's a great point too, because you're going to do your research into, and I guess as a actual sport level, you can kind of put out all of the numbers that you want. But I think the return on investment is super clear when the access to these drivers and to childhood heroes and things like that has never been easier. And in my opinion, and actually this is your opinion that I'm stealing, is that, do you know what? This is payback because you do this to me all the time. So I'm going to do this to you now.
Fine. Keen to see where this goes.
Is you can be on the grid 10 minutes before Bathurst, literally rubbing shoulders, with your, either childhood heroes or the biggest name in supercars at the moment. So, fans have access to be able to connect with their drivers on that sort of level and to use your comparative, you're not really going on AFL Grand Final into, I'm going to say Port Adelaide's change rooms because we're both Port fans.
We're going to wait a long time for that, I think, the way it's going.
It's an example, okay? Just put that out there.
I blew the dust off the 2004 DVD yesterday.
Of course you did. Is the only person I know with a DVD player that still gets used.
It does, yeah.
You're not sitting in the change rooms of a Port game 10 minutes before they, run out onto the oval. So, I think it is the impact that these drivers have, no matter at what level, are still, some kids' heroes.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right. You can't go on the MCG half an hour before the game starts. As much as I think there's sponsors that push that, and maybe one day it'll happen where they have a dedicated area where you can be out at ground level, fine. But motor racing's been doing that for ever since I've been alive, and probably well before that. It's always been that accessible. Money can't buy experience. We're quite lucky to do it at most rounds. We can wander out to the grid, but it's nothing like going out onto the track before the start of the race. It's just a different energy. In fact, it's almost silent when you're out there before a race. You're walking around in the cars. Like the fans are on the hill, but you're in this rarefied air. It's like not too many people get to go into the Formula One paddock, and I've been very privileged over the years with the Grand Prix coverage in Melbourne to go into the Formula One paddock and just go, when you walk inside, it is a different world. It is a different atmosphere. It's like, doesn't matter how much you try and sell it until you get that opportunity. I mean, if I had money in my pocket, I reckon it'll be sucked out of my wallet 10 minutes after walking into the gate, because that's the feel it gives you. So, and that's what motor racing can do if you give, potential sponsors that look behind the curtains, or stick them in a car and, start it up, or put them on a pair of headphones so they can hear commentary, or put them, next to an engineer or something. That stuff there it doesn't cost anything to do. It just costs time.
Yeah. And I will vouch for the silence on the grid beforehand. I think the last grid walk we did was in Ipswich. Was it? Yeah, because we nearly didn't make it. You were running late because you had to work.
How unusual, having to work at my job.
And I was just there for the experience. But it is, and dummy grid. So those are my three favorite times of the race weekend, and that is track walk on a Thursday. And again, like as a a motorsport fan. I've watched these races for, however old I am now, however old I've been watching motorsport since. And I've watched these tracks, and to be able to like literally put my feet on them and walk around them when there's no cars obviously zooming around, that's a super surreal experience as a fan. And is dummy grid is my, so with our support categories, obviously we don't line up on the grid like you see supercars do. So we've got like a separate area where we'll line up there. And dummy grid, because it's just like the quiet before the calm before the storm, or whatever the saying is.
Yeah.
The drivers are got their helmets on, they're sitting in their car, they're mentally prepping, and it is just I don't know, it's just this weird atmosphere to soak up. And then grid walk would be my other one, because it's you've got these cars that you sometimes have to put earmuffs on because they're so freaking loud, and the reverberation as well is probably even worse. But then it's just like it's all silent, and you just have like a bunch of dedicated, massively huge fans of walking around, and your brand could literally just be front and center.
It's the best. You've summed it up in one. It's exactly what it's about. It's a moment that's never lost on me. The rare chances I get. I think I've done more grid walks this year than I've probably done in 10 years at the events, which is cool. I mean, you are there to do a job at the same time, but it's nice to get out there every now and then and see what it's like from that point. But that's the beauty of the sport, that outside potential sponsors or investors sometimes look at motor racing and go, nah, no thanks, not the demographic we're looking for. But some take that plunge, and they get involved and they're going, gee, we should have done this 10 years ago. So, it goes back to a point before. You've never had the tools that you've got now to do it. It doesn't matter what level of motorsport you want to be in. But for a team and a driver, the advice I'd say is don't just expect the money to roll in, because you've got a race car. You need to work 10 times harder than you've ever had to do to keep those sponsors. Even if it's a $5,000 deal or it's a $50,000 deal, the stakes are just as high. But think from their perspective what they want for that return. Because imagine if someone come and just said to you, well, give me $5,000. What for? Yeah. Always think of what you can do to make things better. And some of this stuff does not cost a cent, like you said. It is purely and watching what you do with socials, going, this is only costing you time. That's all it is. It's not costing you money. It's not putting you into debt. It's not making you live on baked beans for a week because you can't afford to pay. This is just simple stuff. And I can't believe how easy it is now to publicise. Like, I grew up in an era where it was Auto Action magazine or Motorsport News, and you used to have to wait 2 weeks sometimes after an event to read about what happened overseas. I know it sounds like I'm 100 years old, but this is only 25 years ago. So what you've got now is it's instantaneous. You could have a report out done or a vlog done within minutes of the race finishing, and the sponsor might even be there at the track going, okay, yeah, we finished fourth today. Great. What was our numbers? Okay, cool. Done. And that's what I think you provide as a business in motorsport. Something I've seen from the very first day I met you was you give this different outlook. Your end of weekend updates, like even I look through those numbers going, okay, if I was a sponsor, I'd impress what I'm seeing there. And that works. So well done.
Thank you. Geez, I didn't even have to prompt you to say that. So that's
nice.
No.
Did you hear that? That dinging sound was my invoice just going into your inbox. No, not at all.
Well, yeah, I know. You're not charging me for your time either, so how lucky am I?
Yeah, you'd be amazed how many zeros are on that invoice too, by the way. There's just no number in front of them.
Fine. Yeah, no, that's fine. I add it to the list, Noel, so that's absolutely fine.
Yeah.
We'll get for you. We'll make sure that's
But that makes sense, right? That makes sense.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
And that, well, I think because coming in later to the industry, like Coleman and Co was only founded like 6 months ago or something, and again, purely because I am absolutely obsessed with motorsport. So I was like, how do I make these two worlds collide? And here we are. But one, I guess the biggest things I could take away was the fact that nobody's talking about how much time on TV your brand can get. If you pay like a 30-second spot on prime time, right? Forget pay TV, because like KO's like household subscribers, KO's $40 a month now. Like it is the most expensive like streaming service that I am aware of. So you get this access to these high income households who can afford a streaming service like KO. We're not, always blessed with free to air, motorsport being on free to air. So you kind of have to rely on a paid streaming service, or you can engage with fans across social media live and in real time by doing a post, session wrap up. We got fourth and this is what went well, this is what didn't. And I've seen it firsthand of sponsors that were like I've got a little bit of interest, and it was a real squeeze to kind of just like just try it. Like, this is what we're going to do for you. This is what you can see, to, me sending photos of the guys on the dummy grid saying, yeah, about to gear up and and before I would even have a chance before the end of the race for my phone to be going off asking like, oh, how did they go? How are they feeling? Like, what's going on? It's like, shit, this is a really cool narrative that you didn't give two shits about motorsport 3 weeks ago. And now all of a sudden you're asking me how the driver of an Aussie racing car has just gone around the racetrack, or you are that invested that you're like, you know what, I have put my hard-earned money into putting my logo and associating my brand with this driver. I'm just going to tune in. And then it's just like, it's such an addictive sport.
Well, and that's another point too. You've got to also sell the time you're actually on the track. Don't just go, well, we're racing at the Bend this weekend. Yeah. When? Oh, we're in the afternoon sometime. You need to have this clear as day on your socials. We're going to be racing at 2:20 p.m. Put the actual time zone in, because people get confused. Go 2:20, okay, and they've turned on, they've missed the race. You've got to walk this stuff to sponsors and the clients now. You've got to almost spoon feed them what's going on, because they're not just going to sit there all day from 8 till 5 waiting to see your race. They need to know, okay, when's it on? Bang, we'll sell it, and we might even share it on our socials when it's on there as well. So, again, your tools, it goes back to your tools. You have so much of this, and it's so easy to do.
Yeah. And that's another, I guess, key selling point, or a key, invitation for businesses. It's like, yeah, I segue. This is my actual point I was about to say, was that you can pay, like, if you advertise during a prime time spot, you're looking at 10 grand for 30 seconds. Right? Our sessions in support categories typically last, like, by the time you do, like, the formation lap, or if you do a rolling start, whatever, and then the highlights at the end, you can look in upwards of 30 minutes per session for our support guys, right? So if you are either, running at the front, or you're in a really awesome battle pack, or you've just been really smart about brand placement, and you've got, big out their colors, you actually get so much more of that broadcast time. It's not just the leaders that the cameras are focusing on. It's, there can be like the leader, and I hate to pick on him, but, Brock Feeney, who's like 6 seconds ahead of everyone at the end of every race, is kind of like, okay, cool, like, that's a given. But, like, you've got like a Chaz Moster and a Cam Waters, and, potentially Thomas Randall in maybe 8th, 9th, and 10th if they're not having the best day. And it's a focus on their battle pack, because it's like, they're racing really, really hard. And that's where the focus goes. And they could potentially end up getting more TV time than the front guys.
Yeah, and that's where it comes down to having a good director in the TV box that understands, races. Thankfully, we've got a very, very good team at Supercars Media, and some of the other stuff I've done, I've had very, very good directors. And sometimes every now and then you can cue back to a director and say, listen, I think this battle back here is worth having a look at, because, as much as it's good for a leader to have a massive lead out in front over the rest of the field, fans want to see action. Fans want to see, battles. It's harder now, with expanding grids, and I think like the Super Utes went through, and they're still going through some growing pains where, like, I don't want to remember the dark old days of when we had 7 cars roll up to a race, and it was like, well, every player wins a prize here because we didn't have the cars we showed everybody. But now with 24 cars on the grid at every race, it can be really hard sometimes to show everyone, because the battles at the front are really hot, but the battles down the back are just as hot too, but you've only got a short window to show it. So it's a tough one, but it can always, if you're in the mix with those battle packs, then for sure you get more exposure. But the harder you work, it should get a bit easier as you climb the ladder.
Yeah, that's it. I've never met more passionate or dedicated athletes than I think I have since being part of motorsport. The financial potential burden alone for, these racing families can be so great. So sponsors are so valued and so appreciated, and we do want to over deliver for our sponsors, because we are truly grateful. Like I think I said at the start, like, they're the reason that motorsport is still a thing. Without the dollars, that teams can't do it. And I've seen, working with these drivers, the passion and the love of putting that helmet on and being able to go around a racetrack. It's just, yeah, I think that's why it just hooked me, because I was just like, okay, like, how do I make this, how do I actuate this, and how do we support businesses tap into those unbelievably engaged fans? Because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter like who you are. If you're walking around with a race suit, wrapped around your waist, you're a race car driver to some 5-year-old kid, and you don't know who that 5-year-old kid's dad is. He might be the CEO of, a super big company.
Absolutely.
You've just given my kid the most best experience ever. You've taken 2 seconds out of your day to take a photo, maybe chucked him in the car for a couple of minutes and be like, oh, check this out, right? You have no idea what that actual conversation can do, because if I'm that CEO and maybe, I have a very busy life and, I don't get too much time with my kid, and he's just had the best 10 minutes of his life, all because a Toyota 86 or a Super Utes or an Aussie racing car or a Porsche Carrera Cup driver has taken the time to just chat about it. Like, you just look at lasting impact.
Yeah, and I think the drivers now, again, and they've been more accessible. It's a sport full of youth that are getting involved. Like when I started watching touring cars as a kid, it was the Brocks, the Johnsons, the Moffats, Larry Perkins. They're all in their 40s, mid 40s by that point. When you had someone like Scaife come along, for example, he was my hero growing up because he was a guy that I could relate to because he was close to my age, and it was still 13 years older than me. But, there's never been a better time now to have, heroes for kids that are beneath 10 years of age to look up to straight away, going, you know what, I can be a Brock Feeney, I can be a Chaz Mostert, I can be a Ryan Wood, and it's happening quicker than ever. You get them in the karts, you get them into, there's so many different pathways into motorsport now. Like it was tough back in the day because there was no seats available. It was like basically 18 and 19 touring cars out there. Most were all funded by the guys that drove them. Whereas now you've got a grid of 24, sometimes 26 cars. You've got Super 2, potentially Super 3 next year. And you've got Trans Am and all these other categories beneath there to climb that ladder. So I often laugh when people say that motorsport's dying or supercars is dying. It couldn't be any further from the truth. It's never been stronger from an interest level, from a team level. You've got just such a high level of professionalism out there. We do very good in this country, and I've been lucky to do it overseas over the years as well. What we do here is incredible for the population we have.
Yeah. Well, and I love that you don't have to have raced go-karts as a kid to then, get into the sport either. I know some of my drivers have, or they're, like Jude, for example, came through and has a very, very influential last name when it comes to motorsport. Michael Showell, for example, used to race free cross motocross. So, you don't, but then I look at even the females coming through, like the Alice Buckleys and whatnot of the world. She's, jumped her first weekend in Trans Am and won the bloody thing. So, it's,
huge.
And yeah, it's massive. So, it's not where I was going with all of that after I finished fangirling, was that it's not just the first, second, thirds, or the podium places each. You can get just as much exposure and just as much value, if not more, out of, everybody just trying to, their goal is to get a top 10 for the round. Like that's their goal. Or, their goal is to, have a really clean race and get through. Look, I think we've talked about the power of motorsport. And I think you've are two super passionate people about the sport. So hopefully that provides businesses who are interested a little bit of value and a little bit of understanding into kind of one, what goes into making a race weekend happen, but two, the value you can get as a business and the exposure you can actually get as a business if you want to kind of get in at really at any level. We there's plenty to choose from, as you said.
Yeah, absolutely. And we could go on for hours and hours about it, but that's two passionate people that care about delivering a product. I pride myself in looking after drivers and teams and making sure the sponsors are engaged in there. But it's something I highly recommend because I think, for one, it's frustrating to hear the sport getting tagged all the time. It's full of bogans, it's full of knuckle draggers, it's pissed and out of it fans on the hill. It just isn't like that. It's such a clean sport now. It's such a family friendly sport. I mean, footy and NRL, they didn't have glory days back in their early lives as well. And when sports grow, elite sports grow, with that they have to tidy their act up. And supercars worked really, really hard at that early in the days when they were growing in the early 2000s. It might have upset the rusted on fans, but it also opened the door to hundreds of thousands of new eyeballs that probably wouldn't go near it beforehand.
Yeah, 100%. And as someone who has to walk through a paddock with you often, and how long it takes us to get from one point to the other because of how many times you're stopped by drivers, it's really, which I love, obviously, unless I'm in a hurry.
Yeah, my arm tends to turn into rubber some days when you drag me along. We've got to go.
Well, you do. They do get the value and they do get the support from you, and obviously all of the people that commentate with Lowndesy does an awesome job. Crowd does an awesome job. Craig Dontis does an awesome job. Like, you guys are so pivotal in making this happen, because you are, and you've worked out your craft over time where it's like, you know how to get as many sponsor names and businesses in there as you possibly can. Obviously, you guys have rules that you have to follow, so you can't just, ask a driver, so who's every person on your car for the weekend, but it's, you can start to build that narrative. So you guys are super important to our drivers as well.
It's funny, we had a team in Super 2 would have been a couple of years ago. Everything's before COVID now. It might have been 2018 or 19, and they had a sponsor jump on for one round, and we gave them probably a little bit too much, but it was such a unique sponsor in the series that they loved it that much that they signed on for the rest of the season, and that team was like indebted to us. So like, thank you so much for pushing that. But like, the sponsor didn't realise at the time how much of an impact they'd made just coming into our sport. We thought, how the hell has this sponsor ended up in motorsport, in supercars? And, that went on to be a very long relationship with that team, which is awesome for us. We're the glue between the sponsor and the team on the broadcast. If I'm going to offer advice in there, like when you do have sponsorship involved, and you can always message us and message me in particular, email me, whatever, even right up to the last second when you go out. It's just keep it short and sharp. Just say, we've got a business on, they're a local-based business. We can't obviously read out all their facts, but if you say we've got a local business on the car this weekend, they've been around for a while, they're looking to be, with us for a bit longer, then cool, we can do that subliminally. But we can't, obviously sit there and go, they want to thank such and such, because that just doesn't work. You can't do that. Subliminal advertising in motorsport it's done very well in America, and they're starting to do it very, very well in Australia, where you can drop a sponsor name in referencing to your car. Like, the Red Bull Ampol Racing Camaro did a really good job today. TV can't really cut that out because you've done it and they can't chop it out. But if you were, certain motorsports still struggle with that, because you interview a person at the end of a race and they'll go, oh yeah, I just like to thank my sponsors, and it just gets cut. So always be mindful of that when you're doing your TV, or when you're doing your PR for commentary, that, we can't sell, but we can subtly sell.
Yes. And it's just a few drops. And again, knowing your brain the way that I do, I can have a guy have a conversation with you and I've completely spaced out and zoned out. I'm like, yeah. And then, I'm still conscious of the conversation. And then all of a sudden, there's a gap in the action that's going on, and you've just rattled that straight off. So, you guys are really the massive bridge between all of the hard work that goes into putting a package together to race on a weekend, and then obviously showcasing the best of that to the millions of people that are watching around Australia. So, and again, I don't say stuff like that to fluff your ego, because that's big enough. You guys know you're awesome, but it's super important from a team's perspective, and obviously everything that I do.
Yeah, and if you don't communicate it, we don't know. It's as simple as that. Like, thankfully, haven't had too much hate mail over the years. You get the odd one from time to time, one that's still bearing you up from a couple of weeks ago, I know. But if you don't tell us, we don't know. We physically don't have the time to go around, especially my role with sometimes 2-3 support categories on a weekend. And it may sound like we're being lazy, but the more you can send, even if it's in a messenger or it's on Instagram or it's on a text message or whatever, that will more often than not get you cut through. There's no point sitting there and whinging behind the scenes that, they don't even show us on the TV. Well, if you don't give us anything to talk about, we can't talk about you. So we're there for your benefit. But if you don't want to, if you don't help us, we can't help you. So we're open. It's an open door. So you can't we can't please everybody all the time unless you help us. So more you give us, the better chance you got exposure.
Yeah, exactly. So, and that's why our Coleman and Co clients are, I'm always feeding information in, because it's not just obviously, good for you guys to have, but no, it's not just good for the sponsors, I should say, but it's good for you guys to have that knowledge. And I can think of a key example when we were at Sandown, and there was
just about to say the same thing.
Well, it's stuck in my mind, because again, I can be a bit of a space getter sometimes, full disclosure. However, I had information that was super handy for Notts to have. He had literally just, I was listening to him on broadcast, and I was like, oh shit, I know the answer to that. So I'm text. And so you're like, yeah, whatever he said, you're like, yeah, got a thumbs up in the corner. I'm like, whoop.
Yeah.
It's just, but you wouldn't have had that otherwise. So they would have missed out on that call out.
Yeah, exactly. So I hope that helps.
Yes, thank you for your time today. I appreciate it. I was we're to 51 minutes, Knowles. So I don't know what your expectations of this was when I told you 20
No,
minutes,
it's fine.
but I clearly lied.
Your timing's impeccable because my low battery signal just came up on my Mac. I'm in a different office today. Timing's awesome.
As per usual, I pride myself on my timing.
Yeah, exactly.
Awesome. All right, thanks, Knowles. Much appreciated.
Pleasure. Thanks, Megan. Let's do it again.